In this video, I wish to use our very basic understanding of linear perspective to draw a cityscape. A bunch of high-rise buildings like you might see in a comic book where someone's swinging or flying among the tops of the buildings. To do this, I'm going to do a bird's eye view, so I'm going to put my horizon up here high, and that's going to help me select my vanishing point. I'm going to put my vanishing point somewhere near the center. From practical experience, I know that the farther I get from my vanishing point, the more warped my perspective will tend to look. So by keeping the vanishing point near the center, I have less warpage and things will look more natural. Now before I showed you how to draw a box from the front, I'm going to start from the top here. So I put two lines in perspective, and I've drawn two lines horizontally to make the top of a box. I'm going to do the same thing for another box in front of that, two lines horizontally. So these are the tops of two boxes. And then my boxes are going to continue down from the corners of these two tops of boxes in perspective. All of these buildings will be boxes. So I'm going to go all the way down to the bottom of the page. You don't see the bottom of the box. You are below the horizon, so you see on top of the box, but not underneath it. And then I have another building back here that's the same height, and I'm going to draw two lines vertically down from there, and you can see that I've drawn a couple of boxes there. I'm going to speed this up now, and you can see that I keep drawing the tops first and then the fronts. It just makes it easier in this case to put things in front of it and behind. There's no correct way or first line that you have to make. I like to do the tops of my buildings first and then draw down. You can draw the fronts of the buildings and then draw the tops and the sides. That's fine too. Now when I started drawing these, they just looked like boxes. Now they look more and more like buildings as I get more and more overlap. In linear perspective, it's just as important what you draw as what you erase. So in this case, I'm drawing a lot of stuff and I'm erasing anything that I've pre-drawn that might go behind something. So I'll be erasing parts of the horizon where it goes behind buildings, and if I put a building in front of another, I need to erase the parts of the building behind that I can no longer see. That's sort of why I'm starting from the tops of a lot of these, because then it just makes it easier sometimes to see what's going to be in front and what's going to be behind. Now at this point you may notice that I only have three different options of directions of lines that I'm drawing. That's either horizontal or vertical or back to the vanishing point. The diagonals do not match each other unless they're going along exactly the same trajectory back to the vanishing point. So all of the diagonals go to the vanishing point. That's what defines them. They're not the same diagonal. They're all very different because wherever the top of my box is, that's where I have to draw it from, and wherever the vanishing point is, and there's only one, that's where it has to go to. That's going to make it look like these buildings are laid out in city blocks. If at any time you put in a random diagonal, that line will be wrong. All of the diagonals are calculated to the vanishing point. There are no exceptions at this point. At this point you can see I have a virtual sea of boxes. I put in my horizon as sort of hills in the background. And now I'm going to start putting in some surface line across the buildings up front. These will be in the form of windows. I want to show you a couple of quick tricks here. First is evenly spacing these. I'm doing this by eye. Normally I would say measure out a 1/16 or a 1/4 of an inch going down and then make your lines there. But for this short amount of space, I think I can do this relatively evenly by eye, and you can see what I'm doing. Now I'm going to make a diagonal across several of these windows. I'm going to go 5 down so that I have evenly spaced windows on the front. Do you see where the diagonal line crosses each of the lines going down in turn? That gives me evenly spaced windows. As long as my lines going up were evenly spaced, those windows going across were evenly spaced. Now I'm going to do windows on the side. And to do that, I line up each of the windows on the front with the vanishing point along the side, so that each of those lines adds up and equals up to the windows on the front. If I don't do that, I just end up with random lines going down the side. I don't want that. I want them to line up with my windows. Once I run out of windows at the bottom here, I may have to space them out a bit. And I'm going to do the same thing on the side of the building as well. I'm going to count down the same number of windows, and I'm going to make a diagonal from one corner to another, and I'm going to find those lines. because the windows closest to me will physically be larger on my page because they are literally closer to me, and the ones going back in space will be thinner. I'm going to do different types of windows now. Verticals are fairly easy. Horizontals can get a little dicey, but you can do most of this by eye without actually measuring anything. If you would like to measure something, you absolutely can. But in linear perspective, everything is calculated to the vanishing point, so there's not a lot of measurement that's really necessary. I'm putting some more boxes in so that there are some air conditioning units and different types of other buildings on top of the buildings, and they're just simple boxes, still below the horizon line. And I'm also using boxes to make cylinders and all sorts of different shapes so that we can put a water tower on top of a building or some other interesting place. Maybe we'll put a helipad in here. It's up to us what we do to dress up the top of our buildings. But I'm going to put in a lot of windows on the nearer buildings, and I'm going to fade them out as I get all the way to the background. Remember, this is a perspective picture, so the farther back in space I get, the smaller those windows are going to look. So I will get my lines closer together as I go farther back. Also, some of the shapes, like the cylinders, or I'll show you how to do a quick dome or a pointed roof, that's a little bit more intermediate. It's not a simple box, but it still uses a lot of the same rules that we've gone through here. I'll show you a little bit of how to do that here, and then when we get to intermediate linear perspective, we'll look more and more at how to do that with a single point. Also notice that I've put in some paneled windows with space in between. It just means that you erase parts out of the windows that you put in between different windows, and we'll show you some a little closer up here in a moment, so that you can in fact make windows that look more like brownstones, look more like windows that you might see on houses rather than skyrises. Also notice that any building that is drawn directly below the vanishing point, you don't see either side, you just see the front and the top, and if it crosses the horizon, you don't even see the top. You may notice now that I'm drawing an X in the middle of a rectangle, corner to corner. Drawing an X in any rectangular shape is the way we find the center of the rectangle. And we do that very simply on the front, but also it works on the side. So if I were to draw an X on the side rectangles, it would then show me where the center is. I'm going to put in a little clock here, something out of Back to the Future, I guess. Now, if you can find the center of a rectangle, you can make it into two rectangles, and then you can find the center of each resulting rectangle, and you can make it into more and more. I'm going to put some paneled windows in here again. Notice I just drew some long rectangles, just like I did any other windows, and I'm skipping every other one. And then I'm drawing some lines in between the windows, and I'm trying to erase the space with my big old eraser in this little tiny space. But now I have some paneled windows. To find where the windows go back on the side, I need to extend those windows over to the corner of the building, just like I did there, and then draw my line straight back from there. So you can see that I'm just making notches on the front so that I can find where those windows are going to be on the side by comparison to the front. Now I'm going to make a dome on the building back behind it, and to do that I just need to realize that a dome is a partial sphere, and a sphere is already in perspective. So I'm drawing an oval on top of this building, and then I put part of a sphere on top of it. I give it a little oculus there. That's a word meaning the hole in the top of the dome. And really it's a pedestal to put a little statue on. The statue doesn't have much detail because it's pretty darn small compared to the building, and these buildings are pretty darn small compared to us. Now I'm going to do a little stepping on the side here so you can see a more complicated box. I'm just taking one of the boxes, pulling some pieces out, adding some pieces on, using linear perspective to make this shape on the front go back in space, and then using the original box lines that I had there, I'm just sort of carving that space forward, making sure that the back side of that building matches the front. That's all it takes to create more complicated boxes. Now all of my windows on the front, just like the front of any other building, will be vertical and horizontal lines. And any windows on the side, of course, will be going back in space, back to that vanishing point. I'm going to make some tall, skinny cylinders here as sort of smokestacks. These could be factory buildings, making more interesting windows. The front is always easy to make a window on. I'm going to indent a coffer into the top of this building over here, put in some stones because it's close up, and you can sort of see the way everything works in perspective as the lines become vertical, horizontal, or going back to the vanishing point. There are no exceptions in this case over here. Some more sectioned windows here. Give them a little bit of a trellis, and we'll darken them in so you can see them better. And right now I'm just sort of going over some of the lines and darkening them in, putting some other more interesting rectangles on top of buildings so that we have a little bit more dimensionality. Every time you add more detail and some other box in dimensionality, you end up with something that pushes your perspective more. The detail really adds to it. So detail, detail, detail. The more details you put in, the more you're going to want to concentrate them to the front, because as things get farther away from you, you're able to see less of them. So the back buildings aren't going to have windows or any other details on them. They're just going to be sort of silhouettes in the distance. And I'm doing that on purpose because I want them to sort of fade out a bit back there. I might even add some color to it in a moment here so that I can use a little bit of atmospheric perspective. Right now, it's just adding all the detail to the front buildings, and then here's some color. Remember that contrast reduces in the distance and color becomes cooler. So I've put the blues and the purples and stuff sort of going back in space, and I've got some oranges sort of popping a few of these buildings towards us. Here's a couple of older examples that I've done on the dry erase board before. It's the lines that really are going to hold this together. That's why it's called linear perspective. Notice the way the windows give you some feeling of dimensionality. The color is less important than the way the lines go, all back towards a single vanishing point in each of these cases. Knowledge in this case is power, but practice makes that knowledge practical. So you need to do this many, many times. You need to practice your cityscapes, practice putting boxes in perspective. The more you do, the better you will get, and the more you will see the illusion and know how to create it.